Welcome back to Nomad Boat Building. I'm Mark Rudin and we are on the 2.4 meter project. In the last episode, we finished our first layer of planking. And in this episode, we are going to get on to fairing. Fairing is easily the least favorite job that any boat builder has to deal with, but it's an absolutely necessary one. Luckily, in this case, we don't need to get this thing super prime. We do need to sort of level out that surface so the next layer of planking goes on fair, which is why we call it fairing. Now, there's no really good way to get through this super quickly. It just takes attention to detail. One thing we don't do is we don't use any power tools for this. Power tools are really good at messing things up very quickly, and fairing is no exception to that. There is an occasion on some craft, if they're big enough, to use angle grinders or large rotary sanders with a rectangular or a square sanding disc, and you can actually do a pretty good job of fairing with those, but the hull has to be big enough for it to suit that, and this hull is just too small to use anything like that on it. So it's all going to be handwork. Try and make that entertaining for you, and I will see you at the end of this job. Time to start fairing out the hull. So I've pulled all the little hutches out that are tacking the planking down. Now I'm just going to give it a quick scrub down with this longboard just to knock the epoxy out of the joints. There's just a few little bits that are standing proud. And after that, I'm going to go over it with a plane. You can see how there's just like little gobs of epoxy and nubbly bits that are going to make the process of starting this fairing job difficult. The idea is that the plane actually will skim this down to its finished shape a little bit faster than the longboard. And as soon as I can see that I've gotten a good even pattern for the most part, then I'll switch back to the longboard to finish it off. You can see that first scrub just scratches the surface. I just want to get all the sort of little bits of epoxy that are poking out of the joints where the staples were, and that's just going to make the next job a little bit easier. The next part involves just using my smoothing plane. The smoothing plane is leaving a very different result than a sanding board. It's very easy for me to see where I've been, and it's easy for me to see that I've covered the whole surface. And then once again, when I go back to the longboard, I've got a different texture that's going to tell me whether or not I'm hitting the whole surface. So I just go on like that, and you can see in areas where the epoxy was, where I sort of wiped down with epoxy, it changes the color of the cedar. And over here where I planed it off, you can see how these little spots are highlighting where I've got valleys. So it's just a very fast and simple way to sort of get this thing closer to the fairing stage. Abrasives are really good when you've got a surface that's almost flat already. When it's fairly lumpy, in fact, edge tools are a little faster, I think. You can see how this area is already faired out quite nicely. You can see how quickly it identifies that this plank is a little more proud than this one here, and so on. There we go. Now all three of those are nicely faired together. And this process is just not as easy to feel with a longboard, actually. It sort of obscures the surface enough with the scratches that it all looks fair, but it's not until you run your hand over it that you can feel whether it is or isn't. With the surface left by the plane, I can see little facets, and that's fine. but it makes it easier for me to see whether or not I'm getting close to fair. I'll just go over the whole hull like that, and it won't take me very long, actually. I want to thank all my very generous Patreon supporters whose monthly and annual donations make this channel possible, and special thanks to my latest patron, Gus Edmondson. If you can help us out on Patreon, I really appreciate that. There's links in the description or at the end of this video. Giving that a scrape just because I don't need a large volume of epoxy on here. I just really want a light skin coat that'll seal that surface. It'll do the job I need it to do of penetrating that surface and making it more acceptable to the next layer of epoxy that goes on. It'll prevent starvation at the joint. Of course, we're trying to reduce weight, right? So the less I can put on there, the better. just keep doing that, working our way around the hull. The squeegee action will also help to force any epoxy that's here into the stapler holes too. So, kind of doing two jobs. I probably have to go over it with a light dry roller before I'm done, just to make sure there isn't any epoxy dripping out of any of these sort of seams that are not totally flush, because some of them are a little sunken in. That was one thing I didn't worry about while I was doing the planking, was making sure all those seams were filled up flush. I knew it was going to interfere with the fairing process anyway, so I let that slide. Okay, our first round of planking is done. It came out pretty good, and we've got a coat of thickened epoxy on there to help seal it up. And now I got to get ready for the second layer of planking, and here's my stock for it. And it's a 3-inch thick, 14-foot long piece of sapele, or about 8 inches wide or something like that. Because I think we want this particular, the surface grain we have here, which is vertical grain, to be on the face of the planking. So I'm going to cut this into two 3-inch wide billets. Hopefully I've got enough. I went over the boat with a tape measure, measured out the length of all the planks collectively, and I get to about 135 feet per side. And this, in theory, if I get 10 layers out of each one, will yield me 140. So fingers crossed that will work if it works out linearly. I think that the best way to maximize my length is to have these as close to full length as possible, and then I can cut off just the lengths I absolutely need for the boat, and therefore hopefully conserve as much material as possible. If I run out, all I can really do is take a sample of this, go down to my lumber yard, and see if I can find another piece that has the same quality of grain and color. That shouldn't be too hard. It's, you know, sapele is nice that way. It's fairly consistent. Worst case scenario though, I stain the whole boat and try and bring a consistent color to the whole top sides, which wouldn't look necessarily bad. A layer of stain can do a lot for sort of bringing homogeny to something like this. So we'll think about doing that. Whew! Thank goodness that's done. Okay, we are on to the next layer of planking in the next video. So don't forget to subscribe and like, and if this is your first time joining us, check it over here. We've got a playlist for all the other videos in this series. And of course, go to my channel and you can see all kinds of other stuff we've done too. Ciao for now, folks. See you later.